two things you will need to know about and use every day is money and health. Nutrition, food. But in 18 years of schooling, it's the two things you're taught on the least. So it's understanding and taking personal responsibility for your own health. It's your own building, you want to maintain it. So it's like putting scaffolding on a crumbling building. It'll slow down the crumbling, but through time you need more and more scaffolding. That's not the right approach if you want the building to be repaired. A good business model is making people dependent on your product so that it maintains the problem without properly fixing the problem. It's all about people who think that they're right and domineering and demanding other people live out what they think is right. Even at the time of the Spanish flu, they tried to infect other people by sneezing in front of them, by spitting in front of them, and they couldn't transfer it. Is the virus causing the problem, or is it highlighting something that's already there? Is it bringing it to the fore? And I would believe it's bringing it to the fore.
Well, welcome to the Emergency Podcast, Paul, my very good friend Paul Best.
Thank you.
Today we're going to be covering some interesting topics on how we got where we are nutritionally, where we're going to go. We probably will end up doing a bit of free flying because I know from experience we are going to go off at different tangents here. So bear with us, ladies and gentlemen. This is a deep dive into all things nutrition and food and why we are where we are at the minute with this current situation and how we can prepare ourselves for potentially the future. So welcome, Paul. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to let you have an introduction.
Fair enough. I suppose, like at any time I'm talking to someone, people go, who the heck are you and why are you talking on this matter? Personal experience. That's all generally most people can come from. And having grown up and left school at 13 and took ill, I was quite incentivized, you could say, to look into my own health and nutrition. Before that I was interested because it was very sporty. I was doing swimming, athletics, you name it, martial arts. Anything I could do, I was involved in. So I was already that way inclined, but when you're young, you're not that clued in. But obviously taking ill at 13, leaving school, being told you had ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, you had a virus that you were fighting. They didn't know what it was, but your T cells are working overtime. So naturally enough, when you're told that and you're told the possibility is you might be in a wheelchair.
That's at the age of 13?
Yes, that's how these things go. And they said to me that it could last for a year, it could last for 10 years, you could have it for the rest of your life. Just the way it goes. And there was nothing they could do. There was no medication they could give me. There was no anything else. So you kind of like, oh, okay.
So they sort of told you these things and then said, go figure it out yourself.
Kind of, yeah.
So you did.
So I did. To the best of my ability. Now, it took a long time. It was by no means easy. And naturally enough, you go down the vitamin mineral route and you take this, that and the other, and it wasn't working. And you go to reflexology and you do acupuncture and you do chiropractic, you do literally anything. Faith healing, I was taking there as well, near enough, if it was something there, Chinese herbs, try it, done it. And as the years go on and you're trying and you're not really getting anywhere, and that compounds, it gets harder, as time goes by and the years go by and you're like, what the heck am I doing wrong? Or, is this me for the rest of my days? You feel trapped, you're a prisoner in your own body, you don't look as if there's much wrong with you. Even your symptoms are a wee bit seemingly weak on it. It's just like, I'm tired all the time, I'm sore, and people go, well, everyone gets tired and sore, but it's like, no, this is beyond tired and sore. It's like I'm firing on one cylinder here. And wearing several layers of chainmail, like it's like gravity's twice as much. In the early days, like I slept 12 hours a day and I woke up as if I'd run a marathon. I was exhausted mentally, and as the years go by, you go through serious bouts of depression and all kinds of things. So you're like, what the heck am I going to do? And gradually, through a process of trial and error, I found a way out of it, slowly, gradually. But through that process, you're sifting through a lot of information and you're trying to make sense of it, and it feels like an overload, and you're going, it can't be this complicated to try and get better. I still couldn't believe that it was so intensely difficult. And I kind of felt I must be missing something. There's something I'm doing that's not right. And it's probably something real simple, and that's why I'm missing it, because it's so simple. It's like trying to find that needle in the haystack. So through the process of going through all that, I kind of worked out different processes and different ways to kind of filter information and do things. And it's a transferable skill, because it's something that you can use in every area, not just with health. It's how do you find an answer to something by sifting through a lot of information and going through a process. And it is the scientific method. You know, you start with something, an hypothesis, and you test it, and you have controls, and you just, again, process of elimination. And if it doesn't work, well, then you change it up again, and you try again. And it's all these repetitions and all these reoccurrences to try and find where the boundaries are.
Yeah, and there's going to be people out there say, we haven't heard mention yet of a doctor or a GP. You know, did you not go down that particular road? Did you not go straight to your doctor? And say, doctor?
Absolutely. I was saying that was the doctor. That was a GP telling me that I had that, and possibly be in a wheelchair and I could have it. So, and they did the blood tests, and that's what they told me. So
they told you potentially what you have, but they didn't particularly offer you any solutions apart from you've got this for the rest of your life.
Possibly. But it was a virus. That's all they knew. Because your white blood cells are growing, and that's all they knew. And they said sorry. They were nasty about anything, it's just that. And I was sent to the psychologist and all these different things in case it was, you know, something to do with school, or, you know, and all those things were explored, and nothing. So you're left in a situation of like, oh, okay. So where do I go from here? No. Having gone through all that, and as we were saying, it's trying to figure out how to undo a knot, as it were. When in the dark.
With one hand.
Well, maybe one hand. Sometimes we do, but it's really frustrating. So, in this situation that we're in, it reminds me of what I've been through the past 20 odd years, and in some ways longer. It's when you're overwhelmed with a lot of information. How do you filter that? How do you assess? How do you weigh up who's telling the truth, or if that truth is applicable to you, you know, because certain things may be applicable to certain people in circumstances, but not in others. So how do we kind of work our way through, is this useful information? Is it useful to me right now? It may be useful later on, but it may be useful now. So what do you use? What's the standard? What's the process that you go through? So the illusion of health is one of the biggest things. People just assume that sort of you're healthy, you've arrived, that's it. But no one's 100% healthy all the time. You fluctuate, you go up and down. It's life throws curveballs. You will take colds and flus. It's just happens. So it's understanding that health is maintaining within certain boundaries, and you will fluctuate, and that's okay. But if you fluctuate too much, you got to be aware of that and know what to do to get back into sort of the sweet zone. So a combination of different things go on in your life. People instinctively know when they do a lot of physical exercise, they need to take more nutrition in. But I'm trying to get people to realise when you do a lot of mental or emotional,
same thing applies.
Yeah, but who thinks about taking more nutrition in then? Very few. Because you're not moving, and you don't realise you're using up as much nutrition and energy as physical exercise. Because with physical exercise, you're forced to stop. When it's mental and emotional, it doesn't stop. You wake up in the morning and it's swirling away, go to bed at night, it's swirling away. And that becomes your norm. So you don't think that you're stressed, you don't feel as if it's taken that much out of you. But it is. It's like sitting in your car and revving the engine. You'll go through the whole tank of petrol and you haven't even moved the car. So it's taken into consideration your life is a combination of that physical, mental, emotional, and they're all fluctuating. Certain times some more than the other. So essentially I came to the conclusion of distilling everything down into one sentence. It's all to do with input and output. If your output is more than your input, you will get ill.
I remember you saying that before. That's very profound. If you want to just expand on that.
Whatever Latin or Greek term or whatever name you want to put to your disorder or symptoms or whatever, it's a result of input and output. It's like your bank account, withdrawals and deposits. If you're making more withdrawals than deposits, you will get into diffs. Even if your deposits are really good, because I see people, and even I was in that state at one time too, where I was making really good deposits. I was taking in good stuff, and yet it still wasn't enough. It wasn't getting better, and I couldn't figure it out.
Is this where we come to like a tipping point balancing thing, that you're out of whack? In other words, you're not at ease, you're into disease.
Yeah.
From ease. So it's understanding that balance and how you get that back, your body back into ease in some way.
But you'll not know that unless you have context, unless you understand what's actually going on. It's looking at the variables, and people don't take into the variables of the mental and emotional and the physical. And because they're always in flux and they're always moving about, it's kind of like, it can seem too complicated. Like, how do you work that out? But I found you don't have to be like super, like to the milligram and be obsessed and trying to, it's just looking at symptoms and looking at your life and keeping short accounts with yourself. Short accounts in the sense of, if you see problems, if you feel something's not right, stop and consider what has changed within the past number of minutes, hours, days, weeks, and look at those three areas of physical, mental, emotional. Mental emotion is pretty similar, but there's can be a slight difference. But it's looking at that and going, is there more a demand on those areas in this past number of minutes, hours, days, weeks, and realise that's a withdrawal. Even if you enjoy it, because that's one of the things people forget. Your life goes up and down like that, but people's input of nutrition and stuff stays pretty similar. It doesn't move about that much. It doesn't move as much as your life. And if you find that sweet spot where your input and output's pretty good, you know what you're taking in and things aren't moving, you feel great. When you've hit that sweet spot, you feel like, oh, amazing, energy, everything. So what do you do when you feel good? You feel great. You take on more, you do more, you go, right, I'm going to start this, I'm going to learn this, I'm going to try this. So suddenly you've found sort of a sweet spot.
But then you're out again.
Well, you gradually come out. It doesn't start right away because it's like a millimetre out, but gradually that millimetre becomes a mile. But it could take 6 months, a year, 2 years. It's different for each person.
Yeah.
But it's taking that into consideration of the map isn't the territory, but the map helps you navigate the territory. And if you have the wrong context, the wrong map, you're going to hit a lot of things that you were unaware of. So this is where the context is important of. The variables in your life will always be changing. But just like a jigsaw puzzle, the first thing you do is get all the straight edges. So you have context. You have like, right, it can't go further than this. And then you slowly try and put the pieces in between. You may not have all the pieces, but you have the clumps. So this is the whole thing of, when it comes to health, you don't have to know all the names and what everything does and, you know, be overwhelmed. It's just listening to the body and learning, like a musical instrument or a dance or so forth. It's repetition leads to retention. And the more you start to be circumspect and aware of the variables in your life and cater towards that, it stops you going out of whack too much. The same with my grandmother. She never measured anything. My great grandmother was the same. Like, it was a handful of this and a pinch of that, and it's just all ratios, rough ratios. Now, if someone was coming in there with a millimetre, they'd be like, oh, that's out, and that's 5 grams too much, and this is 5 grams too little. But it always turned out fine, because, you know, there's buffer and there's an area that, you know, it's fine. As long as it's within that, there's no big deal. And that's what I'm saying. It doesn't have to be super precise that, oh, 50 milligrams too little. That's going to hurt me. You know, it's nothing to do with that. It's just roughly considering, okay, there is a lot of buffer room, but it's the chronicness of it that gets us. The body is very forgiving in the short term, but when it goes on for a length of time, then...
Okay. I mean, there's going to be people listening to this who say, I've never really had to take control of my health. I've always been reasonably fit and healthy. You know, some people say we spend the first half of our lives trying to make an income and a living, and then we spend the second half of our lives trying to get our health back.
Yep.
It could be that they don't know where to turn. They know something's not right. They've fallen into a disease of some sort.
Yep.
They've gone down the doctor route, and they're really not getting any satisfaction there.
Yep.
But they just don't know where to go. I mean, where would you go if you were that sort of person? Who would you turn to?
It's a very good question, and it's very difficult because I couldn't turn to anyone. So it's you're gleaning from multiple different sources. And again, in 18 years of schooling, the two things that you use every day of your life, regardless of who you are, your race, your religion, your background, whatever job you want to do, whatever your interest is, the two things you will need to know about and use every day is money and health. You know, nutrition, food. But in 18 years of schooling, it's the two things you're taught on the least.
Yes, we had that conversation before.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? You know, that's sadly lacking in schools for a reason.
For a reason.
You're not taught about health, and you're not taught about money.
And
not properly.
That can't be accidental. Especially when you just look at it objectively, that every single person requires that every single day. So surely you would major in majors and minor in minors. Like you do.
I think so, wouldn't you?
You don't use trigonometry every day of your life unless you're in that field, but the majority of people don't. But you know, it's things like that. If that's given more place or more time than others, you'd be like, what's the agenda here? What's the desired outcome? So in terms of people trying to make things overly complicated, and that's the very opposite of what I'm trying to do, is I'm not trying to oversimplify it either. I'm just trying to make it realistic. It's a bit like a musical instrument. You learn the scales, but the scales aren't the song. They're not the tune. But whenever you have a framework, like I was saying, whenever you have a map, whenever you have certain things, then it gives you more capacity to move it and adjust it. You can course correct.
It's foundations.
Yes.
It's basics.
Yeah.
It's get the basics right, get the building blocks right.
Exactly.
Foundations of a house don't start at the top.
Exactly.
Everything has to be grounded first.
And you have to become comfortable and familiar with it in order to move it around. So I can't be with someone 24/7. You can't have your pocket health guru or whoever it is always there every day with you. So it's understanding and taking personal responsibility for your own health. It's your own vessel, it's your own body, it's your own building. You want to maintain it to the best of your ability. And yes, we all need help, and we all appreciate times when we're sickly or tired, people helping us out with that. But essentially, you need and want to have the skills so you can do it yourself, so you're not dependent on someone else. And what happens is you've created a priesthood and a class of people who demand that you go through them to obtain health. If you want the answers, you know, and that's a dangerous situation to be in, no matter what it is in life, to have one group of people who kind of go, we're the gatekeepers, you have to come through us. And that's the complete opposite of what I want to do. It's not that there won't be people that will be more skilled, and yes, there is people that you would go to because you forget and you just need a bit of help now and again. They'll always be there, but that's different than having a kind of a closed off group that demand that you come through there. You know, and that they're very wary about you trying to do it yourself. So if people can understand the terrain, if people can understand it and get a good idea of the map, it helps them with the actual reality of the terrain.
Sure.
So in that process of figuring out those basic ratios are important. And also my grandfather taught me how to bake bread and make tarts and all kinds of things, sponges, and I kind of use that as an analogy as well, because getting all the ingredients doesn't make the cake. You have to get all the right ratios of ingredients next, but getting the right ratios of ingredients still doesn't make the cake. And the next thing you have to do is you need to know how to put it together. So it's really that 3-step process that we all need about 90 odd different things for this body to exist. You know, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, essential fats, air, water, you know, light. We all need the same ingredients, but the ratio of ingredients we all need is going to be different depending on height, weight, activity. So that's the fluctuation, but that's where it starts to get a wee bit difficult. And even how to put it together, the next part is some people respond better taking things in the morning or taking things in the afternoon, you know, depending on your circumstances. So you're always trying to tweak it to the individual. There isn't a, this is the set.
One size fits all.
Yeah. And that's dangerous and it's detrimental because your life doesn't fit into nice 9 to 5s. It doesn't fit into a nice steady rhythm. It fluctuates, it goes up and down, and even if you do somehow find a pattern or rhythm, you can guarantee it will be change. So this is where you need to know how to course correct yourself rather than always depending on someone else. And it's just being circumspect. It's keeping short accounts for yourself. It's just being aware of what is fluctuating and moving in my life, which there will always be, and what do I need to take in to replenish. And again, people forget it's things that you enjoy doing is still an output, is still a withdrawal, and you need to take it in. Like I would see a lot of mental health nurses, I would see a lot of physical trainers, and for me they're essentially the same because they have a massive withdrawal output, even though it's coming from different areas. Because with mental health, again, it's that emotional thing. Whenever you leave someone or a situation, you can't really switch that off that easily, unless you're a psychopath. But most people, exactly. For most people, you know, they have compassion and it weighs upon you. And it does, being around even people in conflict is draining, even if you're not involved in it. Just that whole emotional, it drains you. So you need to think, I need to take in to replenish that experience. But that doesn't happen because we run on our adrenaline and cortisol and we just push past and we take stimulants and just whatever to get through. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's gradually through time. You can get away with that for so long, and some people can get away with much longer than others, but eventually you will collapse. Your body will go, I do not have the resources to maintain. And then this is where all the problems start to creep up. So looking at context is for me the key. And even in this whole situation that we have all these authority figures and people saying, you know, this is what you need to do and this is what you need to do. Well, unfortunately, there isn't a one size fits all. Because if you already have pre-existing conditions, you're already at a lower threshold and your tolerance level is going to be totally different. So you can't expect the same measures to be meted out to everyone and to have the same response and the same reaction. So in terms of viruses, virology over the past 150 years has went through a couple of paradigm shifts. And because I like studying chemistry and biology and being told they had a virus, you're somewhat incentivized to look into that. Mm-hmm. And the word virus comes from the Latin word virus, which originally they thought was a fluid. Way back in the day, they thought viruses were fluids, and it means poison. So they thought it was a poisonous fluid. And of course, whenever Pasteur and Beauchamp and all these other ones were doing their experiments with beer and milk and so forth, and saw these wee rods that they call bacteria, and suddenly a paradigm shift. You know, and then they started to realize that it's not a fluid, they're wee particles, and it's not necessarily a poison. So there's a paradigm shift of what they thought it was, and through investigation found it to be something else. And even around the 1990s and early 2000s, there was another bit of a shift, not as big, but the standard thinking was viruses were always smaller than bacteria, until they found viruses as big as bacteria, and in some cases bigger. So even though the majority of them are smaller, again, a slight paradigm shift of it's not hard and fast, of viruses are always smaller than bacteria. So I would suggest there should be another paradigm shift in viruses and to stop calling them viruses, you know. And there still needs to be further investigation. I'm not saying I know this 100%, but there is I think, a lot more to it than what we've been led to believe in the process of what happens in the body. And viruses are very specific. They're lock and key types of exomes, as they're called. They are very specific in what they do to certain cells. So not every cell will be affected. Only those viruses that have the spike proteins for certain receptors will it go for. And we're already eating and drinking thousands of viruses, but they don't affect us because we don't have the cells that match. So in seawater, there's thousands of viruses. There's certain viruses that affect plants or different other animals that won't affect us.
I think this is an area where a lot of people get confused, including myself. I remember reading somewhere that these exosomes, whatever you want to call them, are basically pieces of poison, pieces of virus that the body is trying to detox from, and that's coming out of the cell. Yeah. And so when you're feeling ill and you get a high temperature, it's your body that's trying to release those poisons from out of the cells into the lymph system and out, excreting them. So, and then you hear people saying, well, viruses can't exist outside of the body. They only exist inside of the body. In fact, they're not even living things. They're just pieces of this fluid that comes out of you. So how do you match that with some of them live, using the word live, in the sea and stuff?
People associate movement with living, essentially, even historically. So if it's not moving, they say it's not alive. And then we've tweaked that through time to go, well, if it can't survive or can't reproduce, it's not living, or of all these wee slight variations. Bacteria isn't the same as viruses. Bacteria need a host. Bacteria, feed, as it were. They can replicate. A virus is more like a tool, I would say. And this is well known, your own cell replicates the virus to use against other cells that are not well. So the body does whatever it can to deal with foreign invaders, damage to the integrity of the organism, and it will use temperature, a fever, to deal with it, which is one of the best. It'll use T cells, it'll use all these different things to try and deal with whatever it is, but certain things, it needs viruses to deal with it. Mm-hmm. So again, that's why I would liken it onto like a tool. And just like any tool, how you use that tool can be detrimental or not. So if the cells are healthy enough, why would the body choose to take the virus and replicate it against healthy cells? It wouldn't. So a virus, it's the difference between causation and correlation. If every time you seen a fire and you saw a fire engine there, you would think, are they causing the fire? Because I'm seeing it always there when there's a fire. Right? That's the difference between causation and correlation. Mm-hmm. So is the virus causing the problem, or is it highlighting something that's already there? Is it bringing it to the fore? And I would believe it's bringing it to the fore. Mm-hmm. It's showing that the organism has a problem and it's trying to fix it. Now, the cytokine storm that happens, when the virus goes in and deals with it and destroys the cell, and that sort of waste that comes from that, the body tries to get rid of. If the organism is weak, all that waste and all that problem, it can overwhelm the organism and you can die. But
is that like a healing crisis? Is that something similar?
Similar, but it's a fever, you could say, is a healing crisis. It's very helpful.
Very extreme, when the temperature goes too high, then you die.
Exactly. But again, it's highlighting the integrity of the organism itself. If the organism is too weak, if there's too many cells that are damaged, if there's too many areas that are broken down, putting a stress on that system too quickly will overwhelm it.
Yeah.
So this is
the
where,
problem's too extreme.
yeah,
You've gone too far back along that
Yeah.
route of disease.
yeah,
It's highly unlikely you're going to get back. You could do.
you could
You
do,
may
but
have gone too far.
but the probability is much less. So hence the reason why they try and modulate and modify and slow down to give the organism a chance to deal with it at a slower pace so that it can recover better. And that can be hard to do, but it can be done sometimes. But it's recognizing the process of what's happening. You know, the virus didn't make you. How could I put this? When people say, "Oh, I didn't get the cold or the flu," I didn't get it. It's an impossibility. You got it. You didn't get the symptoms. That's the difference. People say, you know, in the sense of, if I didn't get the symptoms, I mustn't have got it. But that's not true. You would have got that bacteria or that virus, but it didn't have any effect on you because your cells.
So, are we wandering into an area of asymptomatic carriers who potentially feel great?
Yeah.
They're walking around carrying something. Are you saying that's the case?
It can be the case, but again, it will have no effect on you if your cells.
But what about
strong.
another person? Because a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is you're an asymptomatic carrier. You could infect me.
Yeah.
So even though you feel 100% healthy, you should be keeping your distance. You should be wearing a mask. You should. Are you saying that there's an element of truth to that?
In some sense, it can be, but it's not as simplistic as that. I can see the logic in it, and I can see how that can happen, but the problem is there's no evidence for it. Even at the time of the Spanish flu, they tried to infect other people by sneezing in front of them, by spitting in front of them, but, you know, and they couldn't transfer it. If the other person is healthy enough, it's not going to have any effect.
Yeah.
So there is an element of truth, but they've exaggerated an element of truth, because if you do have other serious pre-existing conditions, yes, you are at risk, but you're always at risk every year from the flu and from several other things. So it's nothing unique to this.
So this is where, once again, we're straying into the area of like 18, 17, 16-year-olds and under, saying, well, okay, you're never going to get this problem because very, very few children of that age have these sort of problems, but we've got to vaccinate you anyway, just in case, because you might be an asymptomatic spreader. How do we
Absolutely
understand that one?
And that would be logical if there's evidence to back it up, but there's not. And again, it's the wrong. It's kind of going arse about face. It's going at the wrong end of the stick. Building up the organism would be better than trying to shortcut it and going, here's a wee patch, that'll do. It's the same with drugs and so forth. People assume I'm going to be anti-drug and anti-hospitals and anti. I'm like, no. They have their place in what I would call short-term crisis medicine. To stabilise, to slow down, to modulate, fantastic. Short-term crisis medicine. Useless long-term. Because your body can't use it to repair. So it's like putting scaffolding on a crumbling building will not help the building build back up. It'll slow down the crumbling. But through time, you need more and more scaffolding. That's not the right approach if you want the building to be repaired. It's still useful, but again, if you misuse a tool, it's detrimental. So the problem...
How do you build that tolerance, and you need more and more of the same.
Exactly. But the body is still not getting what it needs to repair, because none of those things the body can use to repair. So logically, if you give the organism what it needs to sustain itself and repair, surely that's a better avenue and better route to go.
But it's not a good business model.
Exactly. Because a good business model is making people dependent on your product so that it maintains the problem without properly fixing the problem.
And I would go one stage further and creates different symptoms, and so you need product B and product C and
exactly.
product
And then all of a sudden, because I see people mock other people for taking like 10 different vitamins, and minerals different, and they go, look at you, pill popper, take it. And these people are maybe on 6 or 7 medications themselves, but they don't mock people for that. They don't go, I can't believe you're on blood thinner and cholesterol, statin and all these.
So that's by design. That over the years we've been told that be careful with that vitamin C. You can overdose on it.
Yeah.
Be careful of B12. That can cause this and liver damage and there's lots and lots of things that have been drip fed into the population
and
to make them wary.
Elements of truth. There's always elements of truth. Exaggerated. And it works both ways. And yes, there's bad quality vitamins. There's ones that are completely useless that you are just paying out. But that's a quality argument. That's a different argument than you shouldn't take them or they're not useful. You're dealing with corruption, you're dealing with lies, you're dealing with a bad quality product. But that doesn't dismiss the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Just because you have bad actors or bad agents within an organisation doesn't negate the entire organisation or its remit or its purpose. So again, it doesn't make logical sense if we know these vitamins and these minerals are necessary for your body to survive and repair and use for metabolism. The problem would be then the quality and the amount, not the actual thing itself. Mm-hmm. So when you see short statements like vitamin E causes cancer, I'm like, how is that possible? Because it's in the food supply, we're eating it. Surely it's a quality issue or a quantity issue. And sure enough, when you look at it, it's like they've given rats 16 grams all at once or some crazy amount that, which would cause damage. I mean, if I was hit with a truck of vitamin C, I'm sure it'll kill me. That's a quantity issue. If it was, dropped on me from on high, that quantity is more likely going to kill me.
And I remember something you told me years ago, and that was it's not the substance that kills you, it's the dose.
Exactly. Because even things like arsenic, and people go, arsenic's very poisonous and all these, there has been people who have built up a tolerance to it. Even snake bites and everything, mm-hmm. which are deadly. Mm-hmm. But if you're given a very, very, very small dose, and the body gets a bit of a tolerance to it and learns how to cope with it, their tolerance level can rise. Now, of course, if they take too much, they can die from it. But again, it's all to do with the environment. It's all to do with what the integrity of the organism, how much it can tolerate. Because again, it's all the variables. If you imagine a ground zero, a bomb site, and all the roads to that bomb site are broken down, well, you have to fix all those roads first before you can even get to the bomb site, right? So essentially that's what happens, because I could see 10 people with the same problem, the same major symptom, and it's the loudest noise. But you don't hear all the wee noises behind that. You don't know how many dynamos behind that are knocked down. And that's why for those 10 people, some people will respond really quick and really fast, because they don't have that many things behind that one problem that need fixed. But others do. And they're like, why is this not working for me? Or why is this person doing that? Well, let's look at that and let's see, how long have you had this? And usually the length of time other problems accumulate behind it, So people's perception of reality is the problem. And you have to go through a process of how to filter through that and how to test that to see whether your perception is accurate or not. And that's what people don't do, because they emotionally react, or they can't be bothered, or they don't have enough time, or they're too stressed as it is. So they go, well, I trust them and I'm going to believe whatever they say.
I think in addition to that, Paul, it's because they've been programmed for quick fixes. So, they're relatively okay, which is what you said about they're trickling along, and all of a sudden these problems are building up in the background, and all of a sudden it becomes to the point where perhaps they can't work, or they can't walk, or they can't talk, or whatever. Yep. So they're so used to phoning the doctor and saying, I need an appointment, 5 minutes, fix me, give me a pill, I need fixed.
It's a microwave mentality.
It is. Yeah.
Microwave mentality, quick. It's like Formula One, just pit stop, get it done, out again. And that works great for machines. And yes, you could symbolically, metaphorically call us a machine, but we're much more than a machine. There's much more variables. And I wish it was that easy, that we could just weigh in, pit stop, out again, happy days. But it doesn't work like that, so it's unrealistic to have that expectation. And this is a problem. People want something that will do it for them, and they don't have to change anything about their lifestyle. They don't have to change what they're doing or what they're eating. Just give me something that'll fix the symptom and I'll be happy. Unfortunately, it's not always there. And sometimes they do get it and it does suppress it and they think it's dealt with, but it's not. Again, it's the scaffolding. It's been suppressed, and through time, another fault line and another crack will appear somewhere else, and they take something else to shore that up and scaffold that up, and they go on and they go on, and then suddenly they collapse and they go, how did I get here? It's like when I hear people who are supposedly healthy all the time, I get concerned. Because I'm like, oh yeah, he never takes a cold or flu. I'm like, because so many times over the years, those are the kind of people that hit the wall and hit it real hard. Because they usually are pushing past. They may have had stuff, or there's other things going on.
There's the appearance of being well.
Exactly. And I think it's always healthy to, I think it keeps you humble too, if you get a wee cold or flu every so often, because you go, oh, you know.
I'm not exempt.
I'm not exempt. I'm not a Superman. I'm not, perfect. But it's, again, when you're driving, you're always slightly course correcting the wheel. A fish as it goes in a straight line is always going back and forth. Like any of the rockets and stuff that they use in NASA, it's always the wee.
So we need to learn how to course correct.
Exactly.
But we won't course correct until we know we've got a problem.
Exactly.
Look in the mirror and say, something's not right here, I need to make some changes, some course adjustments.
Exactly. And you know that by the symptoms. If you don't feel right in yourself, there's something going on that's not right. Something's out of whack, something's out of balance. And yes, sometimes you do need help because you're too close to see it. For someone to help you see, okay, you're feeling this way physically, not necessarily because you're deficient in something, but because of a trauma, because of a wound, because of a thought process that's run in the background on a loop, and you don't realise it, and it's draining the life out of you. And it's a filter on how you interact with people and how people perceive you and how you get, only adds layer and layer on top of that. And then someone comes in looking for a vitamin and mineral to deal with that. And it's like, I can't. I can give you stuff to help support the organism in the body, but it's not going to deal with the root cause. So a big part of it is trying to find out what is the root cause here. And I try and spend time with people to try and help them understand how they've got ill. Because it's not enough to just go, okay, this is what you have, take this, not you well. Because they're more than likely to get back into the same problem again because they didn't actually understand what caused it. Yeah. If you understand the process and the different variables and all those things that came in, you're less likely to get into bother again. But if you do, because you know that, then you know how to course correct. And that's why it's important to have a wider context and understand processes better. And again, you don't have to have a PhD or spend a lot of time and money. You just have to, well, you do have to spend a bit of time slowing down and thinking through things. It's the same when you start to learn to drive a car. You get in and it's like, well, you have to look at that mirror and that mirror and that mirror and listen to the engine to know when to change. Plus you have to look at the car ahead. Plus you have to look at the side in case a pedestrian, It can be a bit overwhelming because you're like, so I have to do these, 6, 7 things all at once.
But after a while, you practice, and those things become semi-automatic. So.
You're constantly flipping back and forth between them, and and there's a rhythm and there's a flow to it. But at first, you're like, people get a bit overwhelmed because it's like it's too much. It's a lot. But repetition leads to retention. Sure. Repetition leads to retention. So, just like learning an instrument, the body doesn't know right, wrong, good or bad. It just knows stimulus. And if you keep in a repetition, the body learns to adjust and makes shorter pathways to make that more efficient and easier. So this is essentially what we're trying to do, is to try and help people. What I'm trying to help people is to learn the instrument of their own body as much as I can, to listen to it, to consider it like an employee. You can push it and push it and push it, but eventually it'll rebel, it'll collapse, it'll die on you, it'll do, you got to go, okay, if I don't maintain this, it's going to go down. And it's a gradual thing. And you're always going to make mistakes. I still do. You get caught up and you don't realize it, and because it's so gradual, then suddenly you're like, oh crap, you know. But because I keep short accounts, it doesn't get wildly out of whack. So when you start realizing it, you go, okay, just do what I have to do to get back in. So your life's always going to be like that, and that's okay. But it's just being aware of that you have to be realistic about your expectations. You're not going to be 100% healthy all the time, and that's okay.
Okay. We have about 10 minutes left. Is there anything you want to cover on today's climate that we find ourselves in, whether it's on, I know we can't do too much in 10 minutes, but anything
Sure.
From a health perspective on, there's a lot of talk about onward transmission, about shedding of the virus, etc., etc. So is there anything there you want to try and summarise in the last 10 minutes? We can do another one of these and we can dig further
Sure.
into that, but for now, just to...
Again, I love playing devil's advocate, looking at both sides, for and against. I always advise people to do that. Even if you think you're right, always listen to the contrary point of view. So essentially, whether there is or there isn't, is there something I can do that will cover me? Either way, right? And again, it comes back to, if you build up the organism and give it what it needs, you're less likely to have complications, intensity of symptoms and problems. So again, getting the ratios right, doing what you can when you're around people who are vulnerable to keep your distance, because they are vulnerable, but they're vulnerable, remember, every year, not just for this. It's like when people do something good at Christmas, or they give something to the homeless or people are hungry. That's great, but what about the rest of the year? And this should be a habit and a pattern that should be throughout the year, throughout many other times.
Absolutely.
So if people can take that into consideration, that this isn't just a wee pat in the back, virtue signaling, I'm feeling good, look what I'm doing for other people. Were you doing it before this? Are you going to do it after this? Because human nature does the bare minimum it can do and get away with. It's just how it is. It's an efficiency thing. People just, if I can get away with not doing that, I'm going to do that.
Yeah, one of the areas of concern for me and for a lot of people is this division between people who choose to be jab, double jab, treble jab, boosted, whatever, and those people who don't. It's dividing families.
100%.
I won't let my parents in. They're not coming in, the kids, etc.
And this is where I don't see any difference between religion or politics or even this issue. It's all about people who think that they're right and domineering and demanding other people live out what they think is right. Right. So if your umbrella doesn't keep you from getting wet, me putting up an umbrella isn't going to keep you from getting wet, unless you're under it, of course. But this whole logic of, if your vaccine doesn't protect you, me getting a vaccine isn't going to protect you. Well, but it lessens. Well, lessens by how much? It'll lessen the symptoms, but by how much? Like 1%? 5%?
Yeah, kind of what we're saying is experimental. Nobody knows.
Experimental.
Nobody
There's no data. So you could say theoretically, yes, I could see your argument. It could lessen the symptoms, but again, there's no set amount of percentage it's going to lessen your symptoms. It may lessen someone's 50%. It may lessen yours too. So if it doesn't stop you from getting it, or transmitting it, or from dying from it, it's not that great of a vaccine. Now, if you want to get it, work away. But for you to demand that I get it because of how you feel or you feel safe, if I get it, that's a very dangerous precedent, because where does that stop? What other areas does that go into? And this is what people need to look at, the wider context again. It's not about this issue. And I've spoken about this before on Crawley's show, about the flu vaccine and different other things. I'm against the forced mandatoriness of it, because how many times has the flu vaccine not worked because they got the wrong strain? See, it's not a guarantee. So we already know and this isn't anything mind-blowing, that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. So why is the push for as many people to get this as possible? People just need to look at what's going on behind that, because from the very start of this, they keep moving the goalposts. It was just for 3 weeks. It was just until the numbers. It was just until the vaccine. It was just so.
It's always just, yeah.
When people keep shifting the boundaries, and when they keep offering in different countries like monetary incentives, donuts, pizza, chips, burgers, it doesn't convince me that you're actually interested about people's health. And since when has the government ever given a damn about people's health at such a degree?
Ever?
I'm unaware of it. Again, we're looking at track records here. We're looking at past behaviour. I have no confidence in what a lot of these people are saying. But if you do have confidence in it, work away. Just don't be demanding it for me. That's your choice. And it's really getting back to the point of view of, I'm not responsible for your health. You're responsible for your health.
100%.
And for you to overstep that boundary, what other boundaries are you going to overstep? You know, if you feel entitled enough to do that because of a potentiality, when does that potentiality ever stop? Don't ever drive, because there's a potential you could kill someone. There's potential through no fault of your own. There could be water on the road or something happen. So if we're going to talk about potentiality, it's a weak argument, because again, when does it stop? So,
well, we've run out of time today. Sure. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been excellent. This is to be continued.
Certainly.
We are just scratching the surface, as you rightly know. So thanks again. It's always a pleasure.
Likewise.
Thank you.
All right.
Watch and listen for free on YouTube, Odyssey, Rumble, Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also follow us on Telegram and Facebook for more information.